Pucks with Haggs
is brought to you by Prize Picks.
Welcome to another Pucks with Haggs podcast powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 168th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining in and listening. I'm your host, Joe Haggery. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. You get all of my Bruins and NHL writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns 3 times a week for the Boston Sports Journal, so check that out as well. I do a Q&A as well, answering fan questions. Check out all that stuff and get a subscription there as well. With me today, longtime friend and colleague, Mick Colageo. Mick, please tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
My Rink Wrap blog, I link to X, I almost said Twitter, and Facebook, and I write for the seasonal issues of the Hockey News.
Check all of that stuff out. Mick's work is great. Speaking of great, let's also thank our great friends at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Mick. I think the biggest thing we got to talk about right now is the trade. That's what we should kick off with. We can talk about the game. We can talk about where the Bruins are as well. Clearly, this is the late season fade that we expected to see with this team, and I think it's in full effect right now. They are now only above the Buffalo Sabres in the Atlantic Division. That is a reality check, if nothing else. But yesterday afternoon, they finally made their first move in this retooling that really needs to come with this Bruins team. And we've talked a lot about Trent Frederic getting traded. They weren't able to get the first round pick for him that they used to draft him originally back in the day, which I think would have been the ideal, would have been like what they could have wanted if they could have had their wish. But still, they trade Trent Frederic and Max Jones to the Edmonton Oilers. They get a 21-year-old defenseman prospect.
22 in a couple of days.
Yep, 22 in a couple, but he's, only been in the A for a year or two. He's a young guy. He's good size. Seems like he might actually be able to play in the NHL, be a third pairing guy. So at least they might get some use out of him. But they get a 21, 22-year-old defenseman that will be of some use to the organization. They get a second-round pick, and they get a fourth-round pick. And I honestly think in a down year for Trent Frederic and getting the Edmonton Oilers to take the contract for next year for Max Jones, who absolutely brought nothing to the table this year with the Bruins. He was on the hook for 1 year and $1 million next year. I think this was actually a really good trade for Don Sweeney, and this was good value for Trent Frederic and Max Jones.
I guess I was hoping for a warm NHL body.
Mick, I just want to cut you off right there on that. That does not no good to this team. If you really need to embrace the retool, if you understand what's going on and see that this team needs a change and they need to add some young talent like draft picks, prospects, Don Sweeney should not be trading for NHL players. I think he should be trading for future assets when he make these moves. I just want to say that. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry to interrupt. But.
Well, that's a philosophical question, and I don't think the Bruins are looking to tear the whole team down. So I do agree with you in part that it is in their best interest in situations where they're leveraged into trading a player such as Frederic that they think more future than present, unless the present is there. And I don't mean a 27-year-old guy, but if it was maybe it's because of the recent drafting history.
Yeah. That's a factor.
That I'm not holding a ton of optimism here.
Yeah.
But I do feel more like Sweeney has been really good. His best ability as a GM for the Bruins has been in identifying a player like Pavel Zacha, who had been taken 6th overall in 2015, the infamous 15 draft, and was one of the quiet guys in the lottery, on the edge of that lottery segment, and identifying him after signing Erik Haula as a UFA and then moving Erik Haula to New Jersey so that they could plug and play. And then the Bruins cultivate Zacha as a Krejci-esque replacement. Now, obviously, he doesn't have quite a Krejci's mitts, but he's a better skater or more powerful skater at least. And he made a great play last night. So, I mean, I feel like even though he's had a couple of tough games with certain turnovers and things, that he's been their most consistent forward from October to March. So I think of him. I think of Morgan Geekie. And so it's in that vein that I was hoping he would identify somebody. Now, maybe Warner is an attempt to find that player. He's a guy who was drafted 212th, I think, in 21, and he hasn't played since December, I think, because he got hit in the head with a puck.
Right.
So, I mean, there's just an awful lot of asterisk hanging off of his career right now. And he's 184 pounds, even though he's 6'3", and on the cusp of 22. I don't think we can look forward to him gaining weight. So the question is, what kind of player is he, and can he help them? And how many left shots do they need that are pretty decent at moving the puck, but aren't necessarily going to? Oh no, he's a right. I'm sorry, he's a right shot.
Right. I was going to say, Mick, is that I feel like trading for that guy. Like, I see the numbers he put up in the A. I see what he did. I see the size. I say to myself, this guy's probably going to play at the NHL level and be somewhat useful. I just wonder if they feel they like this player, and if trading for this player frees them up to trade somebody else. We've started to hear Brandon Carlo. We've started to hear Brandon Carlo's name being mentioned.
The most popular ringtone in the world.
I know, isn't it? And we started to hear Brandon Carlo's name being mentioned in trade rumors, and I think we've kind of mentioned him and Coyle as veteran core guys that could get moved at some point. And
those are the names I brace myself over.
Yeah, but I feel like the writing is on the wall a little bit. I think that's the thinking that they might have organizationally. Because usually if you trade a player like Trent Frederic, if you're getting a prospect back, you would maybe try to get a player that could replace him, like somebody similar to him. If you're going in a different direction and getting a prospect that plays a different position, that makes me think that they're trying to find somebody that they think might be an eventual replacement for somebody that they might also trade. So
Perhaps.
Brandon Carlo, I think, is a guy you might look at and say,
if
they didn't have a ton of.
The more I read up on this guy, the less I feel like he's that guy. But but yeah, that was my initial inclination as soon as I saw speculation articles coming out of Edmonton that this guy was only being held back because Edmonton was loaded and he should be on the team. When people are saying that, I'm thinking, well, if that's true. And that's a huge if, because people love to project prospects ahead of their time or bigger than they are.
Yes.
Especially
just look at Merkelov and Fabian Lysell here.
Especially fanboy sites.
Yes. I mean, Merkelov, everybody's clamoring for Merkelov to come up, and then he comes up and he doesn't really do anything. And I understand that he's, trying to do the right things, play two-way, maybe be responsible, and it's taking away from like some of the offensive risk-taking or the playmaking or looking for offense that he might do. Otherwise, like you become a little gun shy when you're a young guy because you want to get the trust of the coaches, and maybe you're not thinking offense as much as you might in the American League. But still, like he's been up several times and he has barely made a ripple when he's been up. And they continue to clamor, the prospect people, about what a great talent he is, what he's doing in the American League, and then they continue to come up and do nothing here. And it's like, at what point do you kind of look at the reality and say this guy is probably a what they used to call a 4A baseball player? This guy might be one of those guys that's going to be really good in the AHL, will put up good numbers, will look like he can play, but he's either not fast enough, not big enough, or a combination of both to be able to have success at the NHL level that he has at the AHL level. And we talked about this, I think, and Koklachev was a name that I mentioned before that was similar. Like, he was a really good AHL player, but he wasn't big enough or fast enough to do it at the NHL level.
Yeah, Merck would fit that description in my opinion. And but I do think he has a lot of fans out there.
Yeah.
And if teams think they can get him a little quicker from point A to point B, just in terms of skating stride, technique, whatever it is, that if he could just get over a fine line of raw speed, then he becomes a much more effective player in the NHL because he's not that big and he's not going to push people over. And even though he competes, he may not win his share of 50-50s. So, but he could be a really good second unit power play guy if you can justify the roster spot. So, he's got skills. He checks every other box. That's the thing with this kid. And so who knows, maybe a potential suitor requested it.
Yeah, or maybe potentially. But like he's been, he was given a chance to play with like Lindholm and Coyle the last couple of games and didn't really do much with it. So it's like that's, once you get to that point where you're put in those kind of positions and you can't grab hold of it when you're getting your chance because of injuries, like, it becomes like, all right, this isn't the guy, and they need to move on to the next option. I think we're starting to get to that point with Merkulov, and maybe he's going to get moved in a trade, to your point, and that would be a good thing if he is, and I think before we'll talk a little bit about who else we think is going to get dealt or who's next, because I think there's going to be more trades, not just the Trent Frederic deal. I think that was just the most obvious one. That was going to get done because he wasn't coming back. Your final sort of estimation, evaluation of Trent Frederic and his time here as he moves on to Edmonton.
This season was an enormous opportunity for Trent Frederic to step apart from everything else that was happening on this team, elevate his game, take the next step in his career, affect the season in a positive way. And he unfortunately never did any of those things. All he did was go with the ship. He listed with the ship. And his season, he looked good for a game here, a game there. A couple of things happened. And so, here we go. And then it peters out over the next week. And then you don't see him again for a few weeks. And, he's chasing a fight with Corey, 80 years old Perry. It's just silly stuff. And a guy who's struggling like everybody else and trying to find his way. And unfortunately, it never really came together for him this year. And if you're the Boston Bruins and you're saying, okay, the next step with Trent, we're at a fork in the road here. It's either we invest in this guy and make him a quasi-core player of this team with the next contract, or we let him go. I think that they made a decision to cut the bait, and decide that the fishing was over here. And that they've seen all they need to see at age 27. And if some guys, now he may go and realize that in Edmonton, but he wasn't going to realize it here. And some guys, it takes that kick in the ass to get them to gear into another level. Who knows if Frank Vatrano would ever become what he is here, what he is in Anaheim, or whatever other teams he was on in between, the Rangers. And yet he was never going to be that here. He needed to grow up. He needed to get a harder body. He needed to trim down. He needed to gain some speed. He needed to develop more snarl in his game and less at management and or the coach. And now he's a guy I'd love to have. But maybe that's going to happen with Freddie. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe. Very popular guy with his teammates. Very nice kid. I always liked dealing with Freddie. He was a fun, easygoing guy.
Loved him. This whole thing breaks my heart.
Yeah, because he was fun to be around, and like the players all loved him. But I think this is the point now that this team is where they need to make some changes. They need to shake up the core group. They need to bring new, fresh perspectives in, fresh blood in. They need to move out some of the players that have gotten too comfortable. I think it's become one of those rooms where they expect to be sort of treated like they're the team they were 2 or 3 years ago, but they're not the team they were 2 or 3 years ago. And I think at that point, when that starts to happen, you need to change personnel. And I think just at every turn this year, they have shrunk from the challenges that they've had. There's been a lot of instances where it's been character check and gut check time for this team, in game especially, and they haven't been able to answer it. And that's a reflection on the mix in the room and the players that they have on the roster. And some of it is just not having good enough talent. Some of it is not having the right makeup, I think, chemistry wise in the dressing room, and not having the secret sauce that you need for a team to be successful. And I think we've seen enough now evidence this year that there's a problem in there and that they need to change some people out. And I don't think Trent Frederic was a problem by any means. But he wasn't a player that had played well enough to merit the contract he's probably going to get in free agency, that somebody's going to look at him and say, this is a power forward that's going to be able to make us tougher. And, he can put double-digit goals up, and he can be a guy that can move the needle for us. And he wasn't that for the Bruins this year, and he hasn't been that consistently throughout his career. He's had flashes. He's had times last year he had a pretty good year, but he wasn't able to build on it, and he hasn't been consistent enough doing those things day in and day out over the course of his career to say that he's going to be that guy. And I just think another team is going to look at him and say, you know, he can be our power forward. He can be our Tom Wilson kind of player. And he's just not that. He's something different than that.
I wonder if he would have benefited from some AHL time.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I thought there were times he would have benefited from, you know, players that he played with at the NHL level that could have shown him the way of what he needs to do to be successful. And he's had enough of those along the way.
Charlie Coyle was a model for him.
Yeah, and he hasn't been able to fully grasp that to realize his potential. And, you know, that it is what it is at this point. I think it's a good point that you make, that maybe a change of scenery and going to a place where he wasn't drafted and developed and where he's going to have to, like, you know, really fight for his food and prove himself to a whole new group of teammates. That might be a good thing for him. And it might, you know, force him to get a little uncomfortable, where I think there's been a lot of comfort in that Bruins room that needs to change. But I wish him well, and I think he's going to do great in Edmonton, and that's a great spot for him to go. Playoff team, he gets to play with some of the best players in the world. That's going to be a really good spot. Max Jones, I saw really nothing. He and Riley Tufte both, I think, have not worked out this year. Don Sweeney's been good at finding those players, other places that will come in and flourish here from other organizations, but those guys just did not do anything in their time here.
Right. Kastelik did work out.
Yes.
Kepke to a lesser degree.
Yes.
You know, and Kastelik, the extension, you know, I applaud very loudly. And the one thing that really pains me is that I feel like the body of work and since the players have been on this team going back to 19 with Coyle and 17 with Carlo, is I wouldn't want to be wrong and think that one bad season says that the milk is past date,
right?
And that it can never be good again. I just would really struggle to make that decision based on a year where so many things went wrong. And these are players who are really, they're system players. They're players who excel as parts of a machine. They're not individual type players. And I think that I wouldn't want to be hasty to move on from them because the room needs a shakeup. I feel like if there was something really compelling on the table that would compel me to trade my number 3 defenseman, then I would certainly consider it, or my eternal number 2-3 center.
Well, but I guess the question is he a number 3 defenseman anymore? And I'm not so sure about that. You know, like I don't. Too many mistakes. The penalty kill, which is his strength, has been terrible this year. You know, I think his play has regressed a bit in all phases. I just don't. I don't know that he's a number 3 defenseman anymore. And I think that's maybe the determination, and part of the reason that he's being mentioned in trade rumors is. And you know, the flip side of what you're saying, Mick, is did they just play over their heads last year? A bunch of guys had career years, the best years of their NHL careers, and they were able to have a good season because so many guys were playing up above their real level. And now we're seeing the regression back to what they really are and what this team is without Patrice Bergeron, without David Krejci, without, you know, Zdeno Chara having retired like 5 years ago, like all the great players that they've lost over the last 5 years or so. It
doesn't all kick in immediately, you're saying.
Yeah.
Like this Wiley Coyote is off the cliff by 500 feet before he realizes what's below.
Right. Are we starting to see all that now? And I think that's a legit point of analysis, and that's a legit, you know, final calculation to come from after watching this season, is that, yes, they have a core group that I think they're going to keep together. I'm not saying they're going to blow it up.
Well, how would you identify it then?
What do you mean?
The core group? You said they have a core group.
I would identify it as
McAvoy, Swayman. Is that it?
Pasta, McAvoy, Swayman, Lowry, I think is going to be a part of it.
Really?
I think Marchand would be. Yeah, I really like Mason Lowry. I know he's made a lot of mistakes, but I think the skill level that he has and the learning, he's eventually going to turn into something very, very good.
You think he'll eventually make it to that level of core?
Yes,
player.
I think so. I think he should be a part of it, and I see it.
I'm not so sure. I like a lot of what he does, but I dislike a lot of what he does.
No, well, I mean, he makes mistakes, but he's a young kid trying to make plays. Like, I get what's happening, but like, he is so far and above more skilled than all the other defensemen. Like, McAvoy's got some pretty good skill too, but like the things that Lowry does, you don't see a lot of defensemen doing. And I think they need players like that are willing to try to make it happen. I think he just continues to be a young guy that needs to learn time and place and picking your spots with that. And through the experience of getting burned, realize what you can and can't do at the NHL level. Like,
I'm okay with that part. This, when the other team has the puck part, is that I get my concerns with.
Yeah.
Will he ever be a player that you can match up with? Or is he going to be the next version of Torrey Krug, where he's really, really good on the power play and he's really, really good at quarterbacking, but he's in Krug's case, he got beat down the ice because of a lack of point A to point B zone to zone speed.
Yeah.
In a case of Lowry, it's really whether or not he's trying to make his next offensive play when the other team has the puck. If that's your defense, then in this league you're going to get crushed. But so I got to see improvement from him over the next couple of years in order to believe that he's going to be part of that core.
I just think he's going to develop into a very good player for the Bruins. I see that.
He certainly has the roster.
But Lowry is part of like Zadorov, Lindholm, McAvoy. Like Peak is going to, I think, stick around. Pasternak, Zacha. I think Marchand will end up re-signing and staying here. Obviously, Lindholm is here. Kostelic is going to be here. Like it's Swayman in that. There's a core of 8, 9, 10 players that I think aren't going anywhere that they're going to build around. But I think outside of that, I think a lot of these players can get moved. I think it's very believable that they could get moved here at the deadline. I think it's incumbent on Don Sweeney and the Bruins to move a lot of these pieces based on, getting future assets, based on changing the mix, and based on, Mick, they have a ton of salary cap space now, like more than they probably expected over the next couple of years to go out and sort of replenish some of these players. Now, have they spent it the best in the past? No. And do you want them spending on players after they brought in Lindholm and Zadorov, who really didn't live up to the money that they're being made? I'm not so sure. I want to get your thoughts on all this stuff in a sec, but I do want to stop and take a pause to talk about Prize Picks real quick, though. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Join over 10 million users and get started today. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun, and it's super simple. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Here are some picks for this week. We've got Connor Bedard, more than 20.75 time on ice. We've got Ryan Donato, less than 0.5 points for the Chicago Blackhawks. And we've got Colton Parayko with more than 1.5 shots on goal. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Prize Picks also offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. So, Mick, your thoughts on what we were just talking about? And,
I think Elias will be a lot better player next year.
Well, yeah, I think he's been good since Four Nations. I thought he was good again last night. He had an assist on the wraparound goal. Yeah. He won 14 out of 18 faceoffs. He was noticeable. This continues to make me wonder if he was in cruise control to make sure he was healthy for the Four Nations. And we're actually seeing a player that's even the real Elias Lindholm now that tournament is over, which I think is a whole different situation to think about, talk about, wonder about. But I think he's been noticeably better since that tournament.
Maybe that was sort of a kickstart for him to play in a more passionate situation that he felt more naturally engaged to.
Yeah.
And because let's face it, this season from training camp forward, has been one calamity after another.
Yep.
And it's been impossible for a new guy to, unless he is just really, really good at compartmentalizing, like, say, Tim Thomas was, he could, like, the world could be burning down and he would make a great save. He just, there's just people who are weirdly able to stay focused. I think that when you look back to Calgary, and then it's Vancouver, and then it's this, and then it's that, then it's free agency, then it's the Bruins, and the Bruins are a mess from soup to nuts this year for the first time in a long time, and who the hell saw that coming?
Yep.
There's just so much there that I know that if that was me, I would probably need this whole season in order to find my bearings. And I think that I'd like to see him with a fresh start and a positive atmosphere. And it isn't automatic, obviously, restarting this machine that they've had running all these years. You look at last night and you say, okay, if I came to a September preseason game and say, hey, we get to see Pasta and Swayman's in that would have been my reaction to that lineup.
Right.
But that's how I looked at it last night on the line chart that their awesome media people hand out. It looks like this for those of you at home. They give you both teams. This is the Toronto game. And I looked at that and I'm just thinking, wow, that's a pretty good preseason night. And I'm thinking that's who they are right now. And it's not because they're not. I mean, the players are trying. The coach and the players are trying to win. But the management's obviously managing for next year.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point, they definitely are, and they have been for a while. And the blows with McAvoy getting injured in the Four Nations tournament, injuring his shoulder, and then Brad Marchand getting hurt, and we may not see him much the rest of the year. We'll see how it goes, but he's out week to week. Like that further hastens that planning for next year. Sort of like it kind of made the decision for them if they were on the fence. And we're seeing now like what happens when you put young guys in, when you have a lineup like this in place. Like, they played an okay game last night as far as offense goes. They scored 3 goals, but like every time Nashville wanted to score after the Bruins scored, they just put on a push and went right back at them and put the puck in the net. And that is just such a sign of a overmatched team that can't handle it when another team makes a push at them.
Even a team with a worse road record than theirs.
Yeah, 2 of the goals, Mick, were less than 90 seconds after the Bruins scored. They gave up a goal, and the other one was
Morgan Geekie. Yeah, after Morgan Geekie tied the game, I tweeted that I think that the Bruins are not going to give up the soon after goal, but they will get their first penalty of the night before this one's over. So there will be some drama, is what I implied. And sure enough, bingity bang. And, the gut was wrong. Where are the Tums?
Yep. I mean, well, you could just see it going that way.
You can set the watch to it.
They just, when Nashville kicked it up a notch, they just couldn't stop them.
Ryan O'Reilly loves to come back to Boston, torch in hand.
He does. Well, and they left Steve Stamkos wide open in the face-off circle in his office.
Yeah, that was a weird one. That was Andrew Peake's patch of ice, and he came over to support Lowry, and suddenly Stamkos finds his way from sneaking through the back door into left circle. Now everybody gravitates away, and everybody thinks Geekie's going to win that puck on the right wing half wall from the offensive view, but O'Reilly beats him on it and fires that pass across. And that was when I just wrote that O'Reilly tortures Boston again. He just loves doing it. I mean, I think the only way to stop Ryan O'Reilly in Boston would have been to sign him one of these years, but we've missed their windows on that.
No, I would have been in favor of signing him a couple of years ago when he was coming off that time in Toronto as a rental player. That would have been the time to get him.
Exactly. That would have been perfect. And that's when that would have been a great timing too.
Yep. But it didn't happen. All right. So Trent Frederic has been traded. Max Jones has been traded. Who else do you see moving on, Mick, ahead of this deadline? Now that it's pretty clear the Bruins are sellers, it's pretty clear they are not going to be in the playoffs this year. It's pretty clear this is going to be like Red Sox in September when they're 15 games out for the rest of the season, which is weird because we have not had many of these with the Bruins over the last 10 to 15 years. So it's going to be a little bit of a different feel for sure. But who else do you think is going to be moving now that Trent Frederic has been traded, who we all thought was the most obvious guy that they were going to sell at the deadline?
Well, you saw Brazo really trying hard to muscle a goal in last night.
Yep.
And he was around the net, raking his body, trying to find a way to push a puck through. Couldn't do it. I think he's trying to get himself traded, because if he fails to get himself traded, then his NHL career is in jeopardy.
Yep.
So that's number one. If these rumors are true that Vancouver wanted Zadorov back, then I think the Bruins would have to look at him and say, Chiarelli acquired Derek Morris in his long search for a partner for Z, and wound up going back on his word and trading Morris. And maybe that's if there's something like that was on the table, I think they'd have to look at it, because that has not worked out. And
for sure,
their defense, they're obviously rethinking the whole thing. And they got two guys out who they're clearly their two best.
Yeah.
But one that I would look at if I were them, just because, they need stability. They need reliability. They need strong system play. They need things that used to be a given here, and they're not anymore. And then you stir Zadorov into that bowl of soup, and now you got a guy who plays a volatile game of hockey that can be really formidable. He can carry the puck out of his own zone with three guys hanging on his back, catching a ride. And he can also blow coverage or chase a player out of the system to the point. And, it's one thing when Nick Boynton was doing it 20 years ago, and that was their system. But they play zone. Are they going to get a new coach who's not going to play that anymore? Is it time to make a complete and thorough departure? Not because another system is a superior style. I don't believe in that. But I do believe that you have to be good at what you play. And your players have to be good at what you play. And I'm not sure that they can tame Zadorov into playing their system. And so what is he? And do you have to play a different game while he's out there? And is that, I feel like they're adding instability to an unstable season. And as good as impressive an athlete as this guy is, and he's a great fun personality, I really like the guy. And I'm impressed by what he can do out there. It's a little like having Elias Lindholm on your team. He's on his program, or Brent Burns. He's going to do something in this game. He's going to impact it, and it might not be in your favor.
Yeah.
I don't. If it's a winger, go all day long. If it's a winger, but a defenseman,
The only thing I look at with him in the season he's had and the way that he's played is you can draw a little bit of a parallel to Zdeno Chara and the really tough season he had his first year here after signing the contract, when he was doing things way more. He was trying to do things way more than he should have. And he was, trying to help a team that was not good by extending what he was doing offensively, by chasing plays, by doing things that weren't in his wheelhouse and weren't in his strengths as a player. And he adjusted, and he was able to figure it out and become a much better player by simplifying and just playing to his strengths. And, obviously had a Hall of Fame run after that with the Bruins.
I don't think
Zadorov is that in any way, shape, or form. He even has said that himself. Don't call me Big Z. But can he tame his own game a little bit and not try to do too much if they add to the talent around him and he doesn't feel like he's being forced or has to do too much, or he can just figure out that is a flaw in his game where he's not playing to his strengths when he's way away from the net in the defensive zone. I don't know. I'm on the fence with that, Mick, because I've watched enough of him now and I've seen him wander to try to make plays so far away from the net in the D zone that and what you don't expect with a guy that big and that physical to do.
Yeah, to me, I agree with you. I think there's only two ways that happens. And one way is he gets old and he can't skate the puck out of trouble as much, so he stops trying to. Or he doesn't move quite as well as he used to, so he stops chasing the play. And
Yeah.
the byproduct of that might be really positive vis-a-vis the system and
Yeah.
cohesion with a D partner.
Yeah.
That may be how that works in his favor as he ages, but that's a tough trade to ask for.
It is. Well, yeah, and a thing to expect. You can't expect that to happen.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we project your athletic decline is really going to help us.
Yeah,
that's when podcasts get silly, and I'll take the blame for that. But
hey, that's all right.
But it's a. But I'm just. I mean, this is where
I never thought of it that way, Mick. I think that's an interesting perspective to throw into it because I never really thought about it like that. But like, it's true. As he gets older, he might even turn into a better defenseman.
He will. I mean, most guys do.
There'll be less risk in his game. All right. I also think the Zadorov to Vancouver thing is interesting. I've definitely heard that they loved him as a player, didn't want him to go. So, that is interesting if it makes sense. If you don't like eat any of the money, like maybe, I don't know. But I think Brandon Carlo is a guy that definitely is going to get discussed. I think Charlie Coyle may be a guy that gets discussed. I think certainly Brazeau is a guy that could get moved for a draft pick. I think there's 4 or 5 guys that are definitely in the mix to get traded. And I don't think Don Sweeney's done by any means dealing players away and sort of reshuffling the deck with what he has. The ultimate question is, is it going to be Don Sweeney and Cam Neely that are drafting these players when they collect these picks that are going to be, making the big signings this summer in free agency, just given if they miss the playoffs and there's such a big miscalculation with what this team was this year, underperformance by your big ticket free agent items, you got to look long and hard at the decision makers and the people like, putting the ingredients for the recipe together when it comes out this bad this season. Certainly injuries are a part of it, but there was a lot of underperformance. And this season has been a mess since training camp with the holdout for Jeremy Swayman. Like this season has been kind of sour milk from like the very first days of training camp all the way through the season, getting Jim Montgomery fired, like, the sort of regression after it seemed like things were improving a little under Joe Sacco, the way they've really flopped here at the end, the injuries at the end. Like you could look at the timeline of the season and basically say that they really never got right for a consistent stretch and never had it going in a good direction for a long period of time. And it's been kind of a lost year from beginning to end.
I would say that you just summed up the season perfectly for their yearbook, for their 25-26 yearbook. And I think that an awful lot of guys who are really good players and become greater than the sum of their parts when the machine is running well. And when the machine's running poorly, those players are not capable of, and that doesn't mean they're not good parts. That's why I struggle with the whole Coyle and Carlo ideas that are floating around, because I feel like those guys epitomize the players who came to camp. Pasta, Geeky, Zaka was the only forward, and Hampus Lindholm was the only defenseman that I felt played to their potential in October, November, before Monty got fired. And I felt like so many of the guys, and I think you identified this very accurately, that for all the things that went wrong, whether it was Swayman's holdout and Korpisalo was pretty good as they needed him.
Yep.
And but they weren't getting the elite goaltending of Ullmark, Swayman together that saved them from themselves on so many nights over the prior 2 seasons. And yet that wasn't there at all this season ever. And so ever might be too strong, but it certainly didn't occur for any stretch. And to me, that group of players, of returning players who inexplicably played below their level as the season progressed, was the more mystifying aspect of this whole thing. And I feel like that was the true driver of why this season went the way it did, because a group of about 10 players who played for them last year were not very good. And there was no apparent reason why. And they've got a kick when Joe Sacco took over. But I felt like they also still were left with the same lack of offense. Pasta hadn't quite heated up, but even so, there was nothing secondary happening on any consistent basis. Geeky was playing better. Bottom line is they didn't have enough guys going offensively. I would love, after Sacco got that initial burst of a few weeks of good hockey and righted the ship, if at that point they had gone out and gotten a Toffoli type to score a goal here or there in some of these one-goal games that turned out to be OTLs or Ls and made them into Ws, if they had just done that 5 times, I think 2 weeks ago, this conversation would have been different.
Yep.
But they didn't. I feel like that was a missed window. I felt like they should have really tried hard to do that. I imagine that Donnie would probably tell us that he did really try hard to do that. And you're always trying hard to do that. And I'm not trying to trivialize his efforts because I feel like they know stuff that I'll never know. But some teams find a way to just identify what they need and go do it. No matter what their cap situation is, they freaking do it. It was like the Lightning, you know?
Yeah.
Did they ever talk like that? No, they just freaking do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what bugs me. And that's the part that we can't be the fly on the wall of find out what's going on in these phone lines, what's on the table, what was possible, what didn't you want to do, why. You know, we never really led into that. So we're left here to speculate. And that's what we do really well. Blah, blah, blah. But it's a tough business they're in. It's certainly stressful. And I mean, it's hard to fire a guy who's been winning 50 games a year since he had until this season, 50 wins per 82. I mean, you got to go back to the Scotty Bowman Canadians to get that average on for like 7 or 8 years. So it's been a bad season. Can they roll it out again with some tweaks and be a much better team again? The body work tells me they can. Watching it, I'm having a hard time with it. I've experienced other prior eras of Bruins hockey where the Bruins were like all that in a bag of chips, 82, 83. They go 50, 20, and 10, finish first overall, and take the dynastic Islanders to 6 games in the semifinals. The next year, they're almost the same team, couple of tweaks. They go to the playoffs, and they lose to the Canadians in 3 straight. They score 2 goals in the series, both by Tom Fergus. From that point forward, the Canadians were the Bruins' daddy for like 3 or 4 years until finally the entire team has changed, and you got 4 guys left from that team that was first overall in 83. You still got Ray Bourque, you still got Rick Middleton, who's at the end, and still get Steve Casper, still get Keith Crowder, who's near the end, and they go and they turn the tables and they enjoy the greatest era of playoff hockey against Montreal that they've ever had from 88 to 94. So it's you just don't know what's coming. You don't know why the milk goes sour. What happened here, and how come these players aren't good anymore?
Yeah, I mean, the why isn't as important as the how to fix it. And the why, I feel like, put it this way: if you want to look at it from the perspective, historically speaking, that you just mentioned, and you're trying to gauge what you want to do with this team, think about the way things have gone against the Florida Panthers the last couple of years, and think about what they would do if they somehow got in the playoffs and played the Florida Panthers in the first round this year. And then you start to say to yourself, they're far away and they need to change it up and they need to figure it out because the Florida Panthers are so much better than them.
They're the machine now.
Obvious, it's obvious when you're watching the two teams out there that they have to make changes and they have to make major improvements if they want to hang with that team, if they want to become a team like that, if they want to, if they dream of being that team again in the Eastern Conference. I think changes need to come. I just think it's very obvious watching this team. They can't roll back with what they had this year, add a couple pieces and think that things are going to get better. I think they need to make some hard choices, and they're starting to do that. I'm sure trading a guy like Trent Frederic, even though they knew he wasn't coming back and they weren't going to pay him a contract, was probably really difficult for Don Sweeney and the Bruins when he was a former first-round pick and a guy that they'd drafted and developed and had been one of their guys. And that's always difficult to do. But I think they're starting to get to a point where they're realizing and they're evaluating and they're, coming up with a game plan that they need to change the mix. I think it's very obvious watching this team and watching the results and watching the different ways that they lose that they were not a good hockey team this year and that they need to change some things up. So I think that's what we're going to start seeing moving forward. I would give Don Sweeney definitely plenty of leeway based on past track record and based on, I think he's a good hockey guy and he's a smart guy and he cares and he's prideful about the Boston Bruins. Both he and Cam are big time. Like I would be okay and fine, certainly, with them continuing to run things and manage things and giving them a chance to correct some of the mistakes and sort of make the adjustments that need to be made to get this team back. But like, it's a lot harder to do when you don't have guys like Patrice Bergeron around anymore, as they're finding out. And like, if in a couple of years they don't get out of like where they are right now, like you're talking about Bruins fans not spending money to go to the games anymore. You're talking about ratings going down. You're talking about that's when changes come, is when that stuff really starts to happen. And we've seen it this year with the booing now that we're hearing on the ice pretty routinely, where fans are unhappy with the product, and understandably so. So that's, once you start down that path, if you can't find a way to reverse course, it's going to end, with changes coming for everybody in that organization. All right, Mick, thank you very much for joining us. Let's also thank our sponsors. Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks ad today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Mick, thank you very much for joining us, my friend.
Pleasure.
Everybody else out there, thank you for listening. We'll see you at the rink.